The alarm bells screamed through the bridge of the UES Relentless as Captain Jake Morrison rolled out of his bunk at 3 in the morning. His coffee was still brewing when Lieutenant Amy Walsh burst into his quarters with a data pad clutched in her trembling hands. "Sir, you need to hear this," she said, her voice shaking. The transmission she played was barely audible through the static, but the terror in the alien voice was unmistakable. The Villani trader was crying as he spoke, his words breaking apart as explosions echoed in the background. "This is cargo vessel Star Dancer, we are under attack, the Drakari have found us, they're boarding the civilian ships first, oh God, they're taking the children for their breeding programs." The transmission cut to static, then silence. Morrison had heard stories about the Drakari since humanity first joined the galactic community 6 months ago. Every species had warned them about the insect swarm that swept through star systems like a plague. The creatures didn't just kill their enemies, they absorbed them, turning captured beings into living factories for more Drakari warriors. Walsh pulled up the sector map on her tablet. 17 red dots showed where the distress signal had reached other civilizations. The Altarians had received it first but immediately shut down their communications array. The Centauri Federation marked the message as spam and deleted it. Even the usually helpful Proxima Alliance simply filed it under unactionable intelligence. "Nobody's going to help them," Walsh whispered, staring at the map. "They're going to die alone out there." Morrison grabbed his uniform jacket and headed for the bridge. The Relentless was just one destroyer in a fleet of over 200 ships conducting routine training near the Kepler Junction. Admiral Tom Bradley commanded from the massive dreadnought Devastator, and Morrison knew the old man well enough to predict his reaction to this news. The hyperspace communication system crackled to life 15 minutes later. Bradley's gruff voice filled the bridge speakers across the entire Third Fleet. "All ships, this is Admiral Bradley. We've received a distress call from the Epsilon Cygni system. I know what you're thinking, this isn't our fight. The Villani aren't our allies. Hell, most of them won't even trade with us because we're too new to trust." Morrison watched his crew exchange glances. Engineering Chief Dave Taylor shook his head slowly. Communications Officer Lisa Hayes bit her lip. They all knew the reputation of the Drakari swarm. 3 centuries of unstoppable expansion. Entire civilizations wiped out in weeks. No survivors, no prisoners, no mercy. Bradley continued his announcement. The Galactic Council has already sent their official recommendation. They advise against intervention. They say the risk is too high, the potential for success too low. They're probably right. The smart play is to ignore this signal like everyone else has done. The bridge fell silent. Morrison found himself thinking about his sister back on Earth, how she'd reacted when he told her about joining the Space Navy. She'd asked him why anyone would want to fight aliens they'd never met for people they'd never see again. But here's the thing, Bradley's voice grew stronger. "I didn't join this fleet to make smart plays. I joined to protect people who can't protect themselves. And right now, somewhere in the Epsilon system, families are watching their children get dragged away by monsters while the entire galaxy looks the other way." Morrison felt something stir in his chest. Around him, he watched his crew straighten up, their expressions hardening with resolve. "The Drakari think they're the apex predators in this galaxy," Bradley said. "They think nothing can stop them because nothing ever has. They've never met humans before. They don't know that when we say, 'no one gets left behind,' we mean everyone. Not just our own species." The fleet's tactical displays lit up as navigation computers began plotting courses to the Epsilon Cygni system. It would take 18 hours at maximum hyperspace speed. 18 hours to reach a battle they might not win against an enemy that had never been defeated. "Signal the fleet," Bradley's final words echoed through space. "We're going to war." Deep within the massive bioship that served as her mobile throne, Queen Mind Hive 7 felt the familiar satisfaction of another successful hunt beginning. Her chitinous form, the size of a small building, pulsed with bioluminescent patterns as she processed data from thousands of drone scouts scattered throughout the Epsilon Cygni system. The Volani were behaving exactly as expected. Their cargo ships had broken formation within the first hour, each captain desperately trying to save his own vessel instead of working together. Their military escorts fired a few token shots before retreating to safer positions. 3 Volani colonies had already begun broadcasting surrender terms, offering tribute in exchange for mercy they would never receive. Hive 7 had witnessed this same dance 43 times before. Every species followed the same pattern when faced with the Drakari swarm. First came denial, surely their weapons would be effective, surely their defenses would hold. Then bargaining, perhaps the Drakari would accept payment or territory in exchange for leaving them alone. Finally acceptance, the hopeless realization that resistance only prolonged the suffering. Her bio-scouts were already identifying the choicest specimens for conversion. Young Volani with strong genetic markers would become breeding stock for new hybrid warriors. The elderly would be processed for biomass. The children would feed the nursery pods until they grew large enough to serve more useful purposes. Commander Lisa Hayes stood in the sensor bay of the UES Devastator, watching her instruments with growing amazement. 18 hours of hyperspace travel had brought the Third Fleet to the edge of the Epsilon system, and the tactical display showed exactly what the Volani distress call had described. Dozens of organic ships, each one larger than a human battleship, swarmed through space like angry hornets around a disturbed nest. "Ma'am, I'm counting over 300 Drakari vessels," reported sensor technician Bill Johnson, his voice tight with concern. "They've got the Volani colonies completely surrounded. Most of their defense platforms are already offline." Hayes had read every available report about Drakari combat tactics during the 18-hour journey. The creatures didn't build their ships in the traditional sense, they grew them from living tissue that could adapt and evolve during battle. A Drakari bioship that survived its first engagement would be significantly stronger in the second fight, having learned from the weapons used against it. The insects also fought with numbers that seemed impossible to overcome. Each bioship carried thousands of warrior drones, and the larger vessels served as mobile factories that could spawn new fighters during combat. Previous civilizations had reported Drakari forces that seemed to grow stronger the longer the battle lasted. Admiral Bradley's voice crackled over the communication system. "All ships, prepare for hyperspace exit. Formation Delta 7. Remember, we're not here to trade shots with these bugs, we're here to end them." The hyperspace tunnel collapsed around the human fleet in a brilliant flash of blue light. 12 massive dreadnoughts appeared first, their hulls bristling with weapons that had never been tested in real combat. Behind them came 40 destroyers, sleek and fast, designed for hit-and-run attacks. 200 fighter craft swarmed around the larger ships like protective birds around their nests. Queen Mind Hive 7 felt a moment of confusion as her scouts reported the new arrivals. The ships were clearly artificial constructs rather than grown organisms, marking them as another technology-based species. Their hulls appeared to be metallic composites similar to what the Altarians had used, though with some unfamiliar design elements. She accessed her genetic memory banks, searching through centuries of accumulated knowledge from absorbed civilizations. These newcomers didn't match any known species profile. Their ship configuration suggested they were relatively new to space travel, probably within their first few centuries of interstellar capability. Colonel Mike Davis walked through the preparation bay of the assault carrier Iron Fist, inspecting his Marines as they checked their equipment one final time. Each soldier wore powered armor that made them look like metal giants, and their weapons could punch holes through solid steel. But Davis knew that wouldn't necessarily matter against an enemy that could adapt to anything thrown at it. "Listen up," he called out to his troops. "Everything you've heard about the Drakari is true. They're fast, they're tough, and they learn from every mistake you make. But here's what they don't know about us, we don't plan on making the same mistake twice." His Marines laughed grimly, checking their ammunition loads and backup weapons. They'd trained for months in simulated combat against adaptive enemies, but this would be their first real test against an opponent that had never lost a battle. Queen Mind Hive 7 completed her analysis of the newcomers and felt amusement ripple through her consciousness. Another soft-bodied species with metal ships and projectile weapons. She allocated a small portion of her swarm to deal with them while the main force continued processing the Villani colonies. Her calculations indicated the system would be fully consumed within 72 hours, even accounting for this minor interruption. The newcomers would provide some interesting genetic material once they were captured and converted. She had no idea that she was about to encounter something that didn't exist in any of her genetic memories, humans who had come to fight a war, not a battle. The Drakari were still analyzing the newcomers when Admiral Bradley gave the order that shocked every species monitoring the battle. No warning shots. No demands for surrender. No attempts at communication. The human fleet simply opened fire with everything they had. Lieutenant Kate Johnson watched her tactical display light up like a fireworks show as 12 dreadnoughts unleashed their main guns simultaneously. The plasma cannons were originally designed for mining operations, capable of carving through solid asteroid rock in seconds. Against the organic hulls of Drakari bioships, they cut through like hot knives through butter. Direct hits on targets 7 through 12, she reported from her station aboard the Relentless. Complete structural collapse on 4 vessels. The others are, oh my god, sir, they're trying to regenerate the damage in real time. Captain Morrison studied the battle display with cold calculation. Other civilizations had made the mistake of treating the Drakari like a conventional enemy, something to be fought ship against ship, warrior against warrior. But humans had spent months studying every available record of Drakari encounters, looking for patterns that other species had missed. All destroyer squadrons, target the breeding vessels only, Morrison commanded. Ignore the fighters. Ignore the warriors. Hit the nursery ships and nothing else. The human destroyer screen peeled away from the main battle line in a maneuver that looked like tactical suicide. 40 fast attack ships dove straight into the heart of the Drakari swarm, past hundreds of warrior vessels that could have easily destroyed them. But the Drakari commanders were confused by this bizarre strategy. Why were the humans ignoring the obvious threats to attack ships that posed no immediate danger? Commander Lisa Hayes coordinated the assault from her position aboard the Devastator. Her sensors identified the massive bioships that served as mobile factories, constantly spawning new fighters and warrior drones to replace losses. These vessels were heavily armored but poorly armed, designed for production rather than combat. Target acquired, reported Gunnery Chief Bob Taylor over the communications system. Nursery ship designated Brood Alpha. Charging main batteries. The human strategy became clear as the first breeding vessel erupted in a ball of superheated plasma. Inside that ship had been millions of Drakari eggs, thousands of genetic templates for new warrior forms, and the biological equipment needed to convert captured enemies into hybrid soldiers. With its destruction, the swarm's ability to replace losses dropped by 15%. Queen Mind Hive 7 felt something she had never experienced before, genuine concern. The newcomers were fighting like no species she had encountered. They seemed to understand that the Drakari's greatest strength lay not in their individual warriors but in their ability to continuously produce new forces. By targeting the breeding ships first, they were attacking the very foundation of Drakari combat doctrine. But the swarm could adapt. It always adapted. Within minutes, the surviving bioships began changing their configuration. Thick armor plating grew over vulnerable sections. Energy weapons evolved to match the frequency signatures of human shields. New warrior forms emerged from the birthing chambers, specifically designed with enhanced boarding equipment to tear through human hull plating. Lieutenant Johnson watched her sensor readings with growing amazement. "Sir, they're learning our attack patterns in real time. The bioships are growing new armor that's completely resistant to our plasma cannons. And those new fighter variants, they're specifically configured to counter our destroyer-class vessels." Morrison smiled grimly as he watched the Drakari adaptation unfold exactly as predicted. Human military doctrine had always emphasized the importance of keeping your enemy guessing, of never showing all your capabilities at once. Let them adapt to your first wave of attacks, then hit them with something completely different. Good, he said, his finger hovering over a series of switches that had never been used in combat before. Let them. The human fleet suddenly shifted into a formation that made no sense according to conventional tactics. Ships that should have been seeking cover instead moved into exposed positions. Weapons arrays that had been firing continuously went silent. For a moment, it looked like the humans were retreating. Then the real weapons came online. The antimatter torpedoes launched first, weapons so destructive that most civilizations had banned their development entirely. Each torpedo contained enough energy to crack a small moon, and the humans fired them in volleys of 12. The Drakari bioships, having adapted their armor to resist plasma fire, found themselves completely vulnerable to matter-antimatter annihilation. Quantum disruptors followed next, tearing holes in space itself and dragging Drakari vessels into dimensional voids from which nothing could return. These weapons violated several galactic treaties and were considered crimes against physics by most advanced species. The gravity bombs came last, devices that created temporary black holes, crushing entire squadrons of bioships into singularities before dissipating harmlessly. The technology had been developed decades ago but deemed too dangerous for practical use. Chief Engineer Dave Peterson monitored the weapon systems from the Devastator's engine room. "Admiral, we're pushing every system past redline. The quantum disruptors are causing spatial distortions across 3 light minutes. The gravity bombs are destabilizing local spacetime. This is beyond anything we've ever tested." Bradley's voice came back over the intercom, calm and steady. "Then it's a good thing we're not planning to test them, Chief. We're planning to use them." Queen Mind Hive 7 processed casualty reports that defied her understanding. In 30 minutes of combat, she had lost more ships than in the previous 3 campaigns combined. The newcomers were using weapons that other species had developed but never deployed, technologies that violated the unwritten rules of civilized warfare. But perhaps most disturbing was the realization that the humans had deliberately allowed her forces to adapt to their initial attacks, only to reveal that those attacks had been a deception. They had sacrificed tactical advantage in the opening engagement to study Drakari adaptive capabilities, then countered with weapons specifically chosen to exploit the weaknesses in that adaptation. These weren't just another species with metal ships and projectile weapons. These were apex predators who understood that sometimes the only way to win a war was to fight it in ways that others were afraid to contemplate. For the first time in 3 centuries, the Drakari swarm was losing. The hull of Queen Mind Hive 7's flagship shuddered as Colonel Mike Davis and his Marines cut their way through the outer biomembrane with industrial plasma torches. The living ship tried to heal the wounds as fast as they were created, but the humans moved with surgical precision, applying chemical inhibitors that prevented regeneration. Davis led his assault team through corridors that pulsed like arteries, their walls slick with organic fluids that served as both atmosphere and nutrients for the ship's living systems. Most species found Drakari vessels nauseating to enter, the humid air, the constant movement of the walls, the sounds that resembled a massive heartbeat echoing through every chamber. The Marines didn't seem bothered. They moved through the alien environment like they were walking through their own barracks, methodically destroying everything they encountered with flamethrowers that burned at temperatures hot enough to prevent biological regeneration. "Contact front," called out Sergeant Lisa Peterson as warrior drones scuttled toward them through the darkness. The creatures looked like giant praying mantises crossed with armored beetles, their razor-sharp claws designed to tear through metal and flesh with equal ease. Davis watched his Marines engage the enemy with tactics that would have horrified other civilizations. Instead of seeking cover or trying to minimize casualties, they advanced directly into the swarm of creatures, using close-range weapons that put them at maximum risk. Molecular acid sprayers dissolved chitin armor in seconds. Sonic disruptors shattered internal organs. Plasma knives cauterized wounds so quickly that even Drakari regeneration couldn't keep up. "This corridor leads to the primary neural cluster," reported Marine Tech Kate Williams, consulting her scanner readings. "But sir, we're taking heavy casualties. Maybe we should fall back and call an orbital bombardment." Davis shook his head as he reloaded his weapon. "No retreat. No orbital strikes. We do this the hard way. The difference between humans and other species became clear as the Marines pushed deeper into the bioship. When a Drakari warrior drone managed to sever Marine Johnson's left arm, he simply switched his weapon to his right hand and kept fighting. When Corporal Taylor took acid burns across half his body, he used his emergency medical kit to stop the bleeding and rejoin the assault. Queen Mind Hive 7 monitored the boarding action through her ship's neural network and felt something that had never existed in her genetic memory banks: genuine terror. Every other species she had encountered followed predictable biological patterns. When injured, they sought medical attention. When outnumbered, they retreated. When facing certain death, they surrendered. The humans did none of these things. They fought with wounds that should have incapacitated them. They advanced when retreat was the logical option. They continued attacking even when their own deaths seemed certain. 3 systems away from the main battle, Captain Janet Brooks studied the tactical display aboard the heavy cruiser Vengeance with growing frustration. Her intelligence team had spent the last week tracking Drakari supply lines back to their source, following hyperspace disturbances and biological waste signatures to locate the swarm's breeding grounds. What they found made her stomach turn. The Theta Serpentis system contained 3 worlds that had once been home to the Kelrani, a peaceful species of aquatic humanoids known throughout the galaxy for their artistic achievements and philosophical writings. The Drakari had conquered these worlds 18 months ago. Ma'am, long-range sensors are showing massive biological complexes on all 3 planets, reported Ensign Dave Anderson from his station. The structures appear to be processing facilities of some kind. Brooks already knew what they would find. The Drakari didn't just kill their enemies, they converted them into living factories for producing more warriors. Entire populations were kept alive in biopods, their bodies used as incubators for Drakari eggs, their minds consumed to fuel the Queen Mind's intelligence networks. Lieutenant Commander Bob Taylor pulled up detailed scans of the second planet's surface. Captain, we're detecting approximately 2 million Kelrani life signs. They appear to be contained within the biological structures, but they're still alive. Standard galactic protocol in this situation was clear. Attempt negotiation with the captors. Offer prisoner exchanges. Coordinate with galactic authorities to arrange humanitarian relief. Above all, preserve innocent life whenever possible. Brooks stared at the tactical display for a long moment, watching the red indicators that showed Drakari breeding facilities spread across 3 worlds like a cancer. Each facility contained thousands of enslaved beings whose bodies were being used to create more warriors, more ships, more Queen Minds that would spread across the galaxy to consume other civilizations. Weapons, prepare planet cracker missiles, she ordered quietly. Target all primary nesting sites on all 3 worlds. Her weapons officer, Chief Petty Officer Amy Rodriguez, hesitated. Ma'am, the blast radius will encompass the civilian population centers. We're looking at complete planetary sterilization. Brooks nodded slowly. She understood the mathematics of the situation with perfect clarity. Save 2 million Kelrani who were already being slowly killed by their captors, and allow the Drakari breeding program to continue producing billions of warriors. Or sacrifice those 2 million to ensure that no other species would suffer the same fate. It was a choice that other civilizations had faced before, and they had always chosen to negotiate, to seek alternatives, to find solutions that didn't require such massive loss of life. That was why the Drakari continued to spread across the galaxy, using the moral constraints of their enemies as weapons against them. Launch planet crackers on my mark, Brooks said, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was ordering. All primary targets, simultaneous detonation. The missiles launched in silence, each one carrying enough destructive power to crack a planet's crust and render it uninhabitable for 1,000 years. The Kelrani would die, but so would every Drakari egg, every breeding facility, every genetic template that could be used to create new swarms. Rodriguez monitored the missile trajectories with tears running down her cheeks. Time to impact, 4 minutes 30 seconds. Ma'am, are we sure about this? There has to be another way. Brooks watched the countdown timer and thought about her own children back on Earth, about the billions of humans who were counting on the Third Fleet to end the Drakari threat permanently. Other species had tried the gentle approach for 3 centuries, and the swarm had only grown stronger. Sometimes there is no other way, she said softly. Sometimes the only choice is between evil and a greater evil. The planets burned, and the Drakari reproductive cycle in the Theta Serpentis system died with them. It was a decision that would haunt Brooks for the rest of her life, but it was one that only humans had been willing to make. The silence was deafening. After 18 hours of continuous battle, the absence of weapons fire felt almost unnatural. Admiral Tom Bradley stood on the bridge of the Devastator, staring out at what had once been the most feared military force in known space. Now it was nothing but floating debris and lifeless biomatter drifting through the vacuum. Commander Lisa Hayes moved between workstations, coordinating the massive cleanup operation. Human salvage crews were methodically processing the wreckage, not to recover anything useful, but to ensure that nothing capable of regeneration survived. Every piece of Drakari organic matter was being fed into industrial furnaces aboard the fleet's support vessels. Final sweep complete on Grid 7 Alpha, reported Chief Petty Officer Dave Martinez. No biological activity detected. Moving to Grid 7 Beta. Hayes nodded, checking another sector off her list. The Drakari weren't truly dead until every cell was destroyed. Their regenerative capabilities meant that even a small fragment of bioship could potentially grow into a new vessel given enough time and resources. The humans were taking no chances. The first response came from the Villani survivors 6 hours after the battle ended. Captain Jake Morrison received the transmission personally, watching as Elder Counselor Velterra appeared on his communication screen with tears flowing down her elongated face. "Captain Morrison," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. We cannot find words adequate to express our gratitude. The Drakari had taken our children, our future. We thought we would die forgotten, just another species consumed by the swarm. You have given us our lives back." Morrison felt uncomfortable with the praise. "We did what anyone should have done, Elder Counselor. We're just glad you're safe." But even as he spoke the words, Morrison knew they weren't true. The human fleet hadn't done what anyone would have done, they had done what no one else was willing to do. 17 different species had received the Villani distress call, and all of them had chosen to ignore it. The silence from those 17 species spoke volumes. No congratulations. No offers of assistance with the cleanup. No acknowledgement that the Drakari threat which had paralyzed galactic shipping for 3 centuries was finally over. Just radio silence and the uncomfortable awareness that their new neighbors had solved a problem they had all been too afraid to face. Ambassador Helen Price arrived 3 days later aboard the diplomatic courier Harmony, expecting to begin damage control for what the Galactic Council was already calling the human incident. What she found instead made her question everything she thought she knew about warfare and diplomacy. The human fleet had spread across 7 star systems, conducting what could only be described as systematic extermination. Every world that showed signs of Drakari contamination was being subjected to orbital bombardment. Not strategic strikes against military targets, but complete planetary sterilization that would render entire worlds uninhabitable for centuries. "Admiral Bradley," she said as she was escorted onto the bridge of the Devastator. "The Galactic Council has sent me to discuss your methods. There are concerns about the scope of your operations." Bradley didn't turn away from the viewport, where the 3rd planet of the Zeta Reticuli system was burning under sustained bombardment from human cruisers. "Concerns," he repeated flatly. 300 years of Drakari expansion, billions of dead across dozens of civilizations, and they have concerns about our methods. Price tried to find diplomatic language for what she was witnessing. "Admiral, the Council understands the threat the Drakari posed, but surely complete planetary sterilization is excessive. There might be survivors, other species enslaved by the swarm who could be rescued." "There are no survivors," Bradley replied, finally turning to face her. "The Drakari don't take prisoners or slaves. They convert everything they capture into biological resources for more warriors. Every person they took is already dead, we're just making sure they can't be used as raw material for the next swarm. The ambassador pulled up her data pad, showing casualty reports that she hoped would shock the admiral into reconsidering his actions. Admiral, preliminary estimates suggest you've sterilized 17 worlds in the last 72 hours. The potential loss of life could be in the millions. Bradley's expression didn't change. The confirmed loss of life from 3 centuries of Drakari expansion was in the billions. Tell the Council that Earth remembers its friends. And it remembers its friends' enemies. Commander Hayes approached with the final casualty report from the battle. Admiral, final numbers are in. 847 human personnel killed in action. 12 ships destroyed, 31 damaged beyond field repair capability. In exchange, we have confirmed complete elimination of Drakari presence in 43 star systems. Price stared at the numbers in disbelief. Less than 900 dead to eliminate a threat that had terrorized the entire galaxy for 3 centuries. The disproportion seemed impossible until she realized what it meant. The humans hadn't just won a battle, they had fought a war of extinction and won it decisively. The Galactic Council will want to discuss reconstruction efforts, Price said, trying to salvage some diplomatic purpose from her mission. Aid packages for the affected systems, rehabilitation programs for the damaged worlds, perhaps some form of joint oversight to prevent this kind of situation from developing again. Bradley smiled coldly. You can tell the Council that if they're interested in preventing situations like this, they might consider answering distress calls instead of filing them under someone else's problem. As for oversight, we don't need galactic supervision to know the difference between right and wrong. Over the following weeks, word of the Drakari extinction spread throughout known space. The reaction was mixed, relief that the ancient threat was finally gone, combined with fear of the species that had been willing to eliminate it so completely. Trade routes that had been closed for decades reopened overnight. Colonial expansion projects that had been shelved indefinitely were suddenly back on the agenda. But in the quiet conversations between ambassadors and the private communications between military commanders, 2 new realities became clear. First, if you needed help badly enough to send out a distress call, humans would answer even when no one else would. Second, if humans declared you an enemy, they would pursue that enmity to its ultimate conclusion. The galaxy had gained a powerful protector, but it had also learned that protection came with a price. Humans didn't fight wars to achieve political objectives or territorial gains. They fought wars to win them, completely and permanently, regardless of the cost. The Drakari had learned this lesson too late to benefit from it. Their extinction served as a reminder to every other species that some neighbors were better kept as friends rather than enemies, and that when humans said, "never again," they meant exactly that.